Hello there and welcome Virtual Space, your LinkedIn community. It is a great pleasure seeing you again in our Thursdays Virtual Space, your LinkedIn lives. So we have taken a break off in May. Well, it's still May, but we've taken a break off for the previous 3 weeks. And we are back now until the end of June with exciting speakers and great topics that we are discussing around virtual and hybrid work. And today we are diving into a topic that has came up in many of the conversations that we had had across this year and also the previous years. We are going to talk about hybrid meetings. And I'm really very excited to welcome on the virtual space your LinkedIn live stage, one of the pioneers when it comes to virtual, but also hybrid facilitation, who is connecting today from the United States. And I'm very happy to welcome with me here from Voltage Control, President Douglas Ferguson connecting. Hey there, Douglas.
Howdy, good to be here.
Hi there. It's nice to finally have you on the Virtual Space, your LinkedIn live stage. Fantastic to discuss with you a topic that is really sort of worrying, I feel, many of my clients. How is it going for you? Hybrid meetings, is that one of the topics that your clients are asking you to dive into?
Yeah, it comes up from time to time. I think the big thing that we always have to unravel and distinguish is how are we defining hybrid?
Okay, well, we dive into this immediately, but Douglas, a little bit of your background because you, with your company voltagecontrol.com, you can find them here. You have a huge community of facilitators that are following you, and I'm also following your your voltage control facilitation labs. How did you get into the area of meeting facilitation? Give us a little bit of your background, please.
Yeah, years and years ago, was a software developer. I started off writing code in high school, and after college, worked at a few startups and started managing software developers, and eventually became a CTO. And so I was in charge of engineering and product and design. And as a leader, I was always really curious about what made for highly functioning teams. How do we create the best collaboration opportunities possible? And so was essentially becoming a facilitator without realizing it. I was one of these folks that did not label themselves a facilitator, but was using and accumulating lots of facilitation skills and tools. And after my last startup, I started to become a little bit more aware of these worlds and curious about, leaning into those skills specifically as I just kind of became a consultant and started Voltage Control.
Mm-mm. And it's really it's amazing to look into the low number of managers who are receiving facilitation training. I think it was a number of less than 12 or 10% that Stephen Rogelberg published in one of his articles, that managers are not really trained to do good facilitation. And as you're saying, to be a good leader, I need to be a good facilitator, whether it is a meeting or facilitation, any kind of conversation, right?
Correct. It is a critical meeting skill, similar to being able to present. We may not be a professional presenter, but we have to be able to present. And facilitation's very much the same, and especially when we think about inviting diverse viewpoints and making sure that we create equitable situations for everyone. Facilitation powers and skills really come in handy. And these are things that we can learn and we can practice, and we can get more confident at.
Mm-mm-mm. And one place to learn and practice is, of course, or are the voltage control facilitation labs. So if you're interested in enhancing and upskilling your facilitation skills, check out voltagecontrol.com and check out the facilitation labs that are a fantastic weekly meeting to get new insights about facilitation. But now we are already in the topic. So you mentioned that when we talk about hybrid, we need to define hybrid first. What would be a definition that you like to use when it comes to hybrid meetings?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks will talk about hybrid work policies, And it's really about, are we in the office at all? If so, how many days a week? Is it mandatory? Is it optional? What are these policies and requirements around how we show up and when we show up? And I think, if we're talking about hybrid through that lens and that perspective, we're really missing out on a nuanced perspective on how to properly prepare for meetings where we might have people joining from mixed perspectives or mixed environments. And if anyone can remember back to the days before the pandemic when we had a Polycom phone sitting in a conference room, and anyone that happened to be dialed into that thing was at a real disadvantage for those in the room. And I think that's the thing we had to keep in mind. Anytime we're in an environment like that, where some folks are together and others are distributed, then we really need to consider how are we designing that experience that really levels the playing field to make sure everyone has access and has a voice.
So we are already talking very much about accessibility and inclusion. Now, one of the topics on how to also create, design, and facilitate great hybrid meetings. When it comes to this aspect of access, what would you say for facilitators is important to consider in the design, the preparation phase, but also during the meeting itself?
Yeah, I think we really got to just like anything, we need to think about we like to refer to meeting participants as learners because we believe that every meeting is a learning experience. And so if we're really creating the conditions for optimal learning, then we're going to have better outcomes.
Yeah.
And so thinking about our learners, like how are they showing up and what different ways are they showing up? Is someone going to be logging in from a coffee shop? Is someone going to be logging in with a sick child? Like just considering all those things. And I think at the end of the day, the most important is understanding. It always comes back to the same principles of designing good meeting experiences as, what is our purpose? Why are we there? And making sure we're designing to align with that purpose and making sure that it's highly clarified, because if we've got folks showing up expecting different things to happen and we haven't made that really clear and haven't brought everyone together to understand exactly what we're trying to accomplish, we're already going to have a bad experience. So we got to put that first and foremost, just like any meeting. And then we need to think about, okay, if we're trying to, for instance, if we're trying to make a decision, what's our decision-making protocol, and how do we make sure that protocol is compatible with the hybrid setting? So, for instance, if we were going to use, we're going to use some dot voting on stickies, right? And we're like, well, that's not very compatible with hybrid because we got folks in the room that can move the stickies and the dots around, but we can't do that in the virtual space. So making sure that we are potentially having everyone join via laptops and they're in a Miro or a Mural. If you're thinking about the how, a lot of people will tell you there's this anti-pattern of having everyone get together in a room and then be it sitting at laptops. But I think it's actually quite powerful because you still got this human to human connection that's happening on the edges. Like I can turn to my friend and say, wow, this is really cool. Right. And you can't do that if we're all at our houses. We can't go when it's break time, we can't have a little sidebar conversation when we grab a snack. We're not having lunch together. So there's so much power in being in the room together, even if we're doing a lot of our work in a virtual space. So I would not shy away from that. And then the other thing is understanding the edges of the work. So what I mean by that is, let's say that in an extreme example, let's say we're doing a hybrid meeting where we've got like 3 offices and a bunch of people working from home. Let's say each of the 3 offices are housing people that work on 3 separate projects, and everyone in their houses work on a 4th project, right? Well, you can do breakouts along those lines. Everyone in office A is going to be in a group together. Everyone in office B is going to be in a group together, and the remote people are going to be together. and you can kind of design some of the decision making and some of the interactions to be kind of aligned with where they're showing up and how they're showing up. Whereas if everybody is working on the same project, or if, across those three, you got 3 projects distributed evenly across those 3 offices, you got to think about your breakouts a little differently, right? And how you align folks, and even how you might use the space in the buildings. So it really does, it really is important to think about your distribution of people and the work they're doing and how that might influence some of your design.
Those are really amazing examples that we need to take into consideration. So in the facilitation design, always think about 2 groups, of course. When you think about the facilitators, and you have done numerous hybrid facilitations, so what would you say, or how do you usually coordinate with your co-facilitator if you have one?
Yes.
And how do you set that up, that co-facilitation process and co-facilitation game, to say so?
Yeah, absolutely. Really pretty vital in the hybrid world. In fact, we talk about having a facilitator in every space. So in the case where we had those 3 offices and everyone from home, well, we've essentially have 4 distinct spaces, but then we've got this like in between space, right? Which is whether it's a Miro board or Zoom or Teams or Mentimeter or whatever, there's this space, this ether that sits between all those spaces, right? And so I think we have to have a facilitator at each one of those points. So in that case, we'd want to have 5 facilitators. We'd want to have a facilitator in all 3 of those offices. We'd want to have a facilitator looking over the people that are virtual, working from their homes. And then we want to have one facilitator looking across all of those and at the boundaries and intersections of all those. Because sometimes people will show up with just 1 or 2 facilitators and just roam around, but you can't be in all places at once. And it really, whoever is in a space where you're currently not in is at a disadvantage. And so, sometimes, especially once you start to get a critical mass of once you get beyond 2 spaces, essentially, then you start to get into territory where, okay, you don't necessarily need lead facilitators that are highly skilled, but you at least want to have people that are informed about the agenda. So there's going to be table leads or space leads, if you will, and you meet with them ahead of time, make sure they understand what we're going to do and they're clear on stuff, so that as you start breaking things, as those breakouts and whatnot start to happen, that they're up to speed, informed, and are ready to in your absence ask questions and clarify things.
If you think about the co-facilitation itself, what is the aspect or the part that you find most challenging?
Sometimes it can just be, especially inside an organization, it can be challenging just to find the time to gather the people that's needed and get them up to speed and train them. And I think because that can be challenging, it can be easy to overemphasize that challenge, and then people get afraid and don't do it. So that in itself is like a snowball of a challenge, right? Because it's mildly challenging, but then it becomes even more challenging because people tend to worry about it and then think it's like, oh, that's too much, and then they don't do it. And so I think it's much better to take a small step rather than no step at all. So even if you don't have a lot of time to train people or do a lot of prep work, even a small amount would be really valuable, because then you can learn, oh, that's interesting, this actually helped, and you can build awareness over the fact that it's a valuable use of time, and then you start to build those habits, right? Because once people become familiar with some of these things, then they require less upfront management, and so then you can attend to another detail next time, and the next time. And so you start getting this compounding interest and that investment in time.
When you look back into your hybrid facilitation, what was sort of the biggest hybrid event that you were co-facilitating with your colleagues?
Yeah, probably the biggest, I don't know, it's kind of a toss-up because we've done a few client events where they were larger, kind of summit kind of gatherings. But some of that stuff's under NDA, so I'll just share the story of our annual facilitation summit, because it I think really we can go into more detail, and it's a compelling story. So the facilitation summit was hybrid. We had people in the room watching speakers on the stage. We had attendees virtual watching those same speakers live. We were debriefing after each talk. There were moments where the speakers came up to a separate camera where they weren't on stage, but there was another camera space where we could do more kind of real-time bi-directional conversations. So we had some programming in a space like that. And we had everything running. I mean, this is pretty elaborate because we had everything running into Blackmagic switching devices like ATEM Mini ISOs and ATEM Mini ISO Pros. And those devices are great. And we were actually pushing them way beyond their limit. So we had to have 3 of them. But, compared to, I mean, what you can do with those things, really, really cool compared to, if you were the next level up, you're getting into like professional, live streaming and TV switching, like control room kind of devices that cost like, tens of thousands of dollars. And so I'm a big fan of those little things, and they're small enough to where if you're doing something fairly simple, you can just throw it in a suitcase and take it with you. And it's really nice to be able to have multiple camera feeds and then be able to switch between those fluidly, including, we'll do a screen capture off of Google Slides so that we can pipe in presentations as well as switch between different points of view, because no one wants to sit in a virtual setting and just see the security camera view of the room. Like that doesn't feel engaging. So that's that was a lot of fun. And we had 2 people in Zoom that were facilitating the remote attendees. Eric and I were hosting and emceeing and kind of facilitating the room. And then we had Nicole, who was our hybrid facilitator, who was sitting at that boundary, like watching Zoom, hanging out near that bi-directional camera, and inviting folks over to engage and have dialogue. Also, since she was keenly watching that edge, she could get Eric's attention, my attention, or she could get a hold of Mark or Shannon inside of the Zoom pretty easily. So it's got, it's being attuned to what's happening and being able to like get folks' attention and shift everything. Because if you don't do that, sometimes the environments can tend to diverge, and it almost feels like 2 meetings or 2 events are happening simultaneously. And if you got someone looking across those boundaries, you can kind of make it a little more cohesive.
Douglas, you were already diving into the topic of technical aspects and technology or camera feeds and so on. And we do know that in the virtual setting, but also in a hybrid setting, technology, of course, is one of the biggest enablers that we have also to, on one hand, have people follow you, but also have them feel connected. So when you think about the technical setup, and you mentioned some of the aspects already, what would you say is like primordial, super important for a hybrid meeting to be successful, be or become successful?
Yeah, we like to talk about the point of connection, and it's I love the double entendre there, because there's the point of connection, i.e. our purpose, like why are we connecting, why are we here, but then also the point, like the place, like how are we creating connection. And so there's so many tools that can do this, whether it's a Miro or Mural, a Mentimeter, poll anywhere. These different polling tools are fun, scribbling and doodling kinds of tools. And that the right tool for the job is going to vary based on why you're gathering and what you want to get out of folks, and also how they're going to be showing up, what tools are they comfortable with, what's the learning curve, are they going to be on laptops or phones, just thinking about those things and how you want to design that user experience. But I think that is the most essential. Like, how are we creating that point of connection where everyone's inputs can be seen, valued, and communicated across the entire group, so that if someone, in Zimbabwe, adds some input, someone in, Poughkeepsie, New York can also see it, right? And so making sure that all that's really transparent and we get eyeballs on all the ideas so everyone feels seen and heard. I think that's the most critical thing.
For the aspect of feeling seen and heard, being inclusive, have a low barrier for virtual but also on-site participants to participate. You have those dedicated facilitators, so the ones on-site, the ones that are online, and even the hybrid facilitator. You have the tools that you already mentioned. What else would you say is important to sort of lower the barrier, particularly for the online participants to be there? And I'm just thinking about the camera feed. You were saying that for online participants, of course, it's not super nice if we have the security camera view. And it's fun because I was just in a 2-day conference where exactly that was happening. We had the security camera view from the back where the IT or whoever is sitting, AV people are sitting, and that was what we were seeing. So I could not see who was asking the question or who was contributing. It was no movement at all there, or no different camera perspectives. And I also know that we online participants were not shown. And I think that's sort of a vicious cycle, no? Because on the one hand, we were not shown, but also all of us switched off the camera, right? Because we were seeing that we are not even really there. So the question would be, from an AV audio video perspective, what would you recommend to definitely put in place to organize and facilitate a successful hybrid and inclusive meeting?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. So usually, and this is one of the reasons why we end up having multiple switchers, because we're switching what's going into Zoom. We're also switching what's getting displayed on the large screen in the room. And that gets even more complicated if you have multiple, how hybrid are we talking, right? It's the multiple physical locations. So when you're thinking about what's getting switched into the Zoom, having multiple camera angles of the room is really powerful. And that can even still be fun for in-person attendees. I mean, how often are you sitting in the back of a conference? I mean, even if it's a room of like 100, 200 people, which is a smaller conference, right? If you're sitting in the back, you're staring at the back of someone's head who's answering a question. It's cool to be able to see them standing up, they're not, it's better than them being a disembodied voice floating in from Zoom somewhere. But it's even better if there's a camera on them and they're on the big screen. So I think this elevates the experience for those in the room as well as those in the Zoom. But I think it's important to have separate switchers, because there may be times where, like for instance, in the Zoom, you might want to have a wide shot of the stage with the slides piping in crisp, like actual digital slides piping in as a picture-in-picture. And you might want to be able to toggle between the slides full screen, the speaker full screen, a tight view of the speaker, like speaker and the slides at the same time. And so that's why you want to have some switching control over the feed into the virtual space, and keeping the stage switching separate, so that mainly that's going to be while the speaker's speaking, it's mostly going to be the slides. Now when you go into Q&A, it could be a handheld camera. You could have a few cameras on tripods that are strategically positioned. if you're going to be doing tight kind of pulls into someone asking questions, even if it's on a tripod, you probably want an operator at that camera so you can pull tight into whoever's asking the question. And certainly you can put the Zoom up on the main screen. That's what we would do when we get in at our summit. What we do during our debriefs, we would switch to showing our virtual facilitators interacting not only with folks in the virtual space, but also people in the actual physical space. And we're using Mural to kind of unpack some of the key observations from the speakers, talk about them, get comments from people, whether if they were in the room, they would come up to the mic and that mic would feed into the Zoom. And there's a camera trained on them. Likewise, if someone in the Zoom spoke up, then you'd see them on the big screen. And so I would say those moments of debrief during our conferences is a prime example of how hybrid meetings should be run. Because not all, I mean, a lot of times if it's a meeting, unlike a conference, you don't have speakers. You don't have to worry about having a stage and having slides. And I mean, maybe there's some of that element, but certainly you want to create this bi-directional collaborative piece where we can see what's happening in each space at a real close personal level. And I've always told people, you're much better if you're doing a simple hybrid meeting with you don't need high production value, just have everyone join with their laptops. So much better than like piping into some camera that's up in the corner staring down on everyone. It's like, and they have these owl cameras and all this technology, and it's just not cool. Like, because the thing is if you're in a meeting with 5 people and they're all represented as one square in Zoom, not nearly as cool as seeing all 5 people that are in the meeting in the Zoom as separate individuals. The only thing we had to contend with is the feedback. And, my wish list is that Zoom would be smart about the fact that, wait, we're all in the same room. Like, we shouldn't, the feedback thing should be a solvable thing if all the laptops are in the same room. Like maybe I can imagine 100 ways they could solve that. There could be just a simple feature, and even if it wasn't automatic and people had to like turn on a mode or opt into something, then but what I recommend people doing is when you join the Zoom, it asks you, do you want to join audio, or you can join a computer audio or dial in. And if you just tell it you're dialing in the meeting, then you're now joining video only. And you just have one person join with audio. And then if you do that, it's really, really important that you have because the thing about laptops is the microphones on laptops are unidirectional. I don't know if you've ever like been in a meeting with someone or a couple people and they join via the same laptop and someone's like sitting off to the side and you can barely hear them. And that's because the microphone is very, very, it's intentional, right? Because Apple and Microsoft and these other companies made these devices so that when you're in a coffee shop, it's not picking up the whole coffee shop. Like it's trying to pick up the person right in front of the laptop. So what I recommend is getting one of these Logitech or Jabra or there's a couple different manufacturers, and they're basically speakerphones, Bluetooth speakerphones, and they have omnidirectional microphones on them. And so most of them are circular, and you basically connect that to your laptop. Zoom will see it. You can make that your speaker and your microphone, set it in the middle of the table, and now everyone in that room can be heard by the remote participants, even if that audio source will just be coming from, it'll be feeding into one participant. The only thing you miss out on there is, it's going to look like whenever anybody's talking that it's the one person talking.
So, that's true. That's true.
You'll get to see
and you see somebody else moving the mouth, right?
Yes, exactly. And so I would just recommend staying in gallery view versus speaker view when you're in those situations, and it works pretty well.
Yeah, true. And I think this is an important point because we know also from the last book from Karen Reid and Joe Allen that audio is such an important part of a virtual or hybrid meeting. Douglas, oh my God, the time has flown by. I want to ask you still one last question, because we talked about this also in our previous conversations. And I would love to hear your perspective on how AI might be integrated, or what kind of artificial intelligence tools or apps are you using for hybrid meetings or virtual meetings? And where do you see that going? Just as a last question for today's LinkedIn Live.
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and it's constantly evolving. I think the thing that's most important is that we as professionals need to be experimenting with these tools. And they are going to profoundly reinvent how we collaborate as humans. And I'm a firm believer that AI will be a collaborator, like a teammate in the future. So really think of them as a coworker, and how we bring them into our work as a thought partner. There's some folks that say that AI is going to kill our critical thinking skills. I think it has the ability to amplify our critical thinking skills and allow us to spend less time on the mundane and the trivial and really go deeper. And so really fantastic to bring in to any meeting or any facilitated session. Let's just ask the AI. Let's prompt the AI for something to give the group something to respond to. And we always talk about the power of prototypes. Such a powerful way to create really engaging meetings and workshops is, let's have something for us to respond to, review, kick around, look at, examine more closely. And if the AI can do that really quickly, even if we hate it, it can be really, really great to understand our perspective better, right? And so having that thing to kick around and understand and learn together as a group, really, really powerful. So, I think there's the synthesizing, generating ideas, those use cases are endless. And whether you just go straight into ChatGPT or you're using one of these other tools that are just flooding the market, there's so many of them. I recommend spending 1 to 2 hours a week. Just carve out the time and go explore and learn, because the one thing is, those who aren't experimenting and playing with this stuff are really going to be disadvantaged as these tools become more and more powerful. You don't want to play catch up later. Just stay tuned in to what's evolving.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about one of the posts that I saw on LinkedIn. It was one of the AI people that I follow posting, well, your job very likely will not be replaced by AI, but somebody who knows how to use AI properly. So also, I think definitely, and I'm trying as well to at least carve out an hour a week to test out and try out new tools. So what's your favorite one that you recently discovered?
Oh, wow. I was playing around with this tool. I think whatever I find new is always my favorite, because it's expanding my perspective on what's possible. So I found this tool called AI Ad Creative, and you basically put in your headlines, and it creates like 100 versions of an ad. And I'd say out of those 100 versions, none of them were usable. But it was really fascinating to think about the things it was suggesting, because then it helped me formulate my brief better, right? Because I was like, oh yeah, I don't want this, don't want that, but that's kind of it's interesting where this is headed. So it was just inspiration. So, which was really cool.
Totally understand. My favorite is still, honestly, since I installed the plugin, I have in Gmail a plugin called Ghostwrite that is writing my Gmail or my email answers. And I really love it because it plays around with all that nice flisky flosky at the beginning, at the end of the email that I'm usually just a little bit not so good at, because I don't want to take that time, but I love it. Yes. Anyways, we know also, just for everyone out there, on Thursdays are the Voltage Control Facilitation Labs. So today there is one coming up If you are interested, go to voltagecontrol.com. I see that today is an Ask Me Anything facilitation consulting. So if you want to upskill and know more, go ahead and check that out. Douglas, for you again, a very, very big thank you for joining me on this LinkedIn Live conversation. Thanks a lot for all the prep work that we were doing together. It was a tremendous pleasure having you here. Thanks.
Thank you.
And don't leave me immediately. I have a virtual cocktail prepared for you backstage, and I'll join you there in a second. Thank you very much, Virtual Space Hero community, for bringing up this topic again to our attention, also providing us with the questions beforehand. You know that if you are not able to attend live, you can always send us your questions, and I will bring them into the conversation so that you are getting your answer, whether you are here live or not. Next week, we dive into the topic of how to maintain a good well-being balance, how to stay healthy and maintain your well-being as a remote worker with Mine from Happy Work Studio. So see you also next week, Thursday, 5:30 p.m. And with that, I'm saying I'm leaving you in this beautiful morning, afternoon, or a good night, and say thanks for being with us. Bye.